Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Happiness Journey with Dr. Dan podcast, where every journey is worth living. My name is Dr. Dan, and I'm your host for today's episode. I'm a bilingual neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavior psychotherapist specializing in anger management issues, both court appointed and private, marriage and relationship coaching using the EFT method, dissociative disorders, narcissistic personality disorders, depression, anxiety, dream analysis, and also provide life, business, and retirement coaching support. I provide individual one-on-one sessions in both French or English, and also do group settings. If you need any assistance, reach out to DMV Therapy and Coaching Services at 301-325-1550, and our website can be found at lifecoach.drdanamzallag.com. Today, I'm very excited to have for our third episode of season 26, a very special guest and expert treating anger issues, Bronwyn Schweigert. And just like every of my past episode, I will leave it up to the guests to properly introduce themselves, as no one can do a better job. Bronwyn, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I am a licensed psychotherapist and I am an anger expert.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here today. So I know that we are still in January, and a lot of people are having New Year resolution, and some of them, beside going to the gym and getting back into fitness, etc., some of them are saying, you know what, this year I'm going to stop with my anger issue. I'm going to get treated. I'm going to go see a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist or psychologist, whatever it is. So if you can, based on your expert knowledge, Bronwyn, tell us about what triggers people anger. Are they born angry? Are they born having a short fuse? What is exactly the origination and how is it happening? Is it because of childhood trauma? If you could just elaborate a little bit more.
Well, yeah, so I'll start with saying one of my goals is to destigmatize anger. You just said trauma or we're born angry. And, you know, I don't like even the phrase where we say, oh, Joe is an angry person, because to me, that's like saying Joe is a breathing person. All humans have anger. We all do. And it's not shameful. It's not bad. It's not pathological. It's not dysfunctional. It can become dysfunctional, of course. And we're all very familiar with that anger can get out of hand. But that's not how anger needs to ever be. And yeah, so anger is just a natural human emotion. Babies are definitely born with anger. That's kind of all they're born with because they're just hungry and they need things all the time. And the only way they can communicate is pretty much through an angry cry. But we we tend to stigmatize it, and that's I really want to undo that because I view anger as like a light on the dashboard of our emotional car that says, hey, check under the hood because something is wrong, something's off, and the goal is to bring it to resolution. So if we can start to view our anger as more of a barometer that something's off, and that's something that is off is not just within us, because anger is not an emotion we just feel when we're going through our day. There's something prompting it, and it's always rooted in a relational context. So humans don't feel anger without other humans creating that anger or creating a trigger or creating something, a triggering event that leads to that anger. So it's not, I don't like anger management because we're treating that individual like the anger is 100% a them problem. And I think those things that we do, the breathing, the grounding, those things are important, but anger is always developed in a relational context. And if we're not taking that into account, if we're not looking at the greater context, that someone might be really legitimately making this person angry. And let's validate that. Let's start with saying, yeah, what is going wrong when you interact with your roommate? Tell me more. Help me understand. And you know what? I totally get why you would be angry. That's actually objectively infuriating what you're telling me, that this person is really passive aggressive with you over and over. Like, that's okay. And if we can start with just validating it, I can say to myself, you know what, Bronwyn, you are okay to feel angry right now because this person told you they'd do this, but they're actually doing something different. That's okay. And I can start by just feeling it in my body. Usually, not always, but oftentimes we feel it in our chest, and I can just put my hand on my chest and let myself feel it and say, this is my anger. I feel this. This is okay to feel. And then the next step, what do I need? Because our feelings are there, our emotions are to move us, like the name emotion, to move us into motion. What does this anger in my chest need me to do right now? Well, I can channel it out of my body through having assertiveness. So I can say, hey, Dan, we were scheduled to start at 11:30. It's 11:45. This isn't the first time this has happened. This is a pattern. What's up, man? So I could just channel it out of my body into the ether by holding you accountable. Let's say this happens with you. That's one way, assertiveness. I could have a boundary. Let's say you are not a safe person to ever confront because you're going to gaslight me. You're going to deflect shame on me. So you're not a safe person. So I don't want to be assertive with you. I want to just have a boundary because you're not a safe person. Or maybe you're my boss and I can't really have a boundary with you. Maybe I can't even be assertive because you're also an unsafe person, but I can bring about accountability. So I can document, this has happened with Dan all these times. I can put the date and time and I can go above Dan's head and hold him accountable to his supervisor or HR or something like that. So those are like three, kind of basic ways we can be responsible for our anger. It can move us forward into healthy resolution.
You caught me off guard here, Bronwyn, because you answered three questions that was going to be subsequent. So you're basically talking about accountability. So something that relates to that, which is if let's say it is an external trigger to bring someone to become angry, isn't it everyone's going to find the excuse to say, no, I'm a very calm person, but this person got me angry. So then
Ah,
you always use that excuse to say,
yeah,
well, I'm not accountable, or it's not my responsibility
yeah,
because I am around that person that
yeah,
triggers those emotion. So
yeah,
that's something that people will start using to say, oh no, I'm the calmest person on earth, but
yeah,
this person triggers me in the wrong way or rubs me the wrong way. So then isn't that some form of excuse for many people
yeah.
to not take accountability?
Yes, yes. So that's a really good question because if we come down to there's these invisible universal boundaries in the world, they're just like gravity. You can't see them, but we need to apply them because otherwise we're really fighting a futile battle. But those boundaries are each individual is only responsible for their own feelings. So, Dan, if you and I are in a relationship, you're not responsible for my feelings. I'm not responsible for your feelings. You're responsible for your feelings. I'm responsible for my feelings. I am responsible to you, but never for you. So if I say something that you don't like and you say, you know what, Bronwyn, now I'm really angry and how dare you? And I'm really calm, except it's your problem. You do this. Then I'm going to say, wow, well, it sounds like you believe I'm responsible for your feelings. And I'm not. I'm actually responsible for my feelings. And so I was being responsible for my feelings by stating something that is true, but I guess that's too provocative for you. You don't want to see that. You don't want to acknowledge that. And that's a bummer, Dan, but that's really on you. Your feelings belong to you, not to me. I need to be responsible for my feelings. So I'm going to speak the truth. And if you react like that, I'm going to be responsible for myself by having a boundary with you because you're gaslighting me, you're deflecting onto me, and you're not a safe person.
Well, that's the term that I wanted to use actually, Bronwyn, is that narcissistic people, they will
Mhm.
use the gaslighting approach to be able to make the other person start doubting as to why they're getting angry. And
Yeah.
that narcissistic person will not be or take responsibility of triggering those feelings to the other person by gaslighting them to say, hey, I'm not responsible for how you feel. You are responsible. But then
Yes.
again, if you look at the dichotomy of control in the philosophy of Stoicism, it says that focus on the thing that you can control versus the thing that you can control. But you could control the reaction of what's going on around you. And that in itself causes someone to be able to get angry at a situation or at a person, but yet not be able to react according or to react peacefully to what's going on to them and not through them. So then
Yeah.
again, that defy the whole purpose of how to manage your anger, because you said in the beginning that you don't believe in anger management, but anger
Mhm.
cure. You could only manage it. So doesn't that contradictory?
Well, so I mean, for the narcissist, then, if that person is angry because they're hearing something that's true, which is usually what is happening, and that makes them angry, then they need to, And regardless, whether we're on the narcissistic spectrum or not, I think all humans can be on the narcissistic spectrum, but for all of us, we are responsible for our own triggers. No one else is.
Mhm.
So I have a huge trigger. My husband, when I'm talking and he looks away, that's a huge trigger for me. That takes me back to my very early childhood and my mom who never made eye contact with me. She never listened to me. And so I get really angry. But my husband's not responsible for my trigger. I am at the end of the day. I mean, I have, enlisted his help and just tried to get him to know how important it is. But he just can't make sustained eye contact the way I would like him to. And I need to be responsible for my own feelings. Not He's not responsible for my feelings. So I need to pause in that moment when he's looking away and I'm talking and I talk to little Bronwyn. I say, little Bronwyn, I know it's really hard when Steve doesn't make eye contact with us when we're talking because I know you feel right now like you don't matter. And I know that's something you felt throughout your early childhood with your mother when she didn't listen to you, when she didn't show interest in you, when she didn't make eye contact, that you didn't matter. But little Bronwyn, I need you to know right now that you matter to me and I am listening. And what you have to say is really important to me. So, regardless if Steve shows it or not, I am all ears and I am very interested in what you're saying. And I'm right here
Mhm.
and you do matter. So, that's how I am responsible for my own trigger.
Okay.
And we all need to learn to do that no matter how dysfunctional we are or not.
But doesn't that relate to having good communication skills? Because if, let's say, in the beginning, during the courtship of a relationship, etc., don't you have to kind of like disclose what are the issue? Not, of course, in the beginning, or else you're going to scare the person away. But as you decide to be able to make a life together, you could say, look, you know what? During my childhood, my mom always never had the possibility to be able to look at me in the face when they were actually discussing issues. So you could tell them, look, this is what triggers me. So what triggers you now? So when you actually address the problem in the future, you will know how to be able to compromise accordingly on not be able to deliberately get them to the point where they're going to really blow up like a landmine. So is there a way that where communication skills are acute related to what triggers the other person to getting angry, and then by communicating you could actually eradicate them?
No, I don't think that's realistic to ever think that it's anyone else's job not to trigger us. It's our job to be responsible for our own triggers. And, one thing human beings are really consistent at is failing each other. And so if I go into a relationship and think, okay, well, I found the perfect husband because he's
Mhm.
never going to trigger me. Like, well, guess what? I'm going to be single for the rest of my life. Good luck finding that one person. I don't have a friend that isn't going to fail me at sometime. Like, we can't outsource that to anyone. That is our responsibility, and that is our job as adults to do that for our inner child, is to say, I heard you, I know what you're feeling, I know why, and I don't blame you, but I'm listening. You're important to me. Even if this person seems like you don't matter to them, you matter to me. That is always incumbent on us.
Okay, so if let's say we go back to the example that you mentioned there, Bronwyn, where everyone is responsible for their feelings, for their emotions, and so on and so forth, and you mentioned again that everyone is going to trigger us, everyone is going to make us angry. So it depends on how, again, we manage that anger towards that external trigger.
Yeah.
So the idea here is we are not immune to whatever can happen to us, but in
Yes.
your expert knowledge, do you think that it's always important to distance ourselves at that specific moment when someone triggers us to be able to avoid letting it escalate? And then you could readdress the problem later on, or
Hmm.
within an hour or a day or so, and then
Hmm.
readdress it. But those who actually uses this approach, they try
Yeah.
to kind of like shove it under the rug, and then
Yeah.
it comes back. So
Yeah.
where's the middle ground where a couple can actually address it without letting it escalate to a point where they say things that they regret?
Yeah. I think, like you're suggesting, taking time can be really helpful, but not always. It's definitely not always a panacea, because a lot of people will just act like nothing happened after they calm down, and then nothing gets resolved. That's the whole point. So I think, I know there are times for me where I just need to keep talking through something. If I take a break, I don't need a break in that moment. I need to keep talking through it, but I can do that respectfully. We can be really respectful with our anger in the moment. I could say, Dan, I'm really upset because you didn't respect this boundary I created for you. And I'm really frustrated. I could just say that. I don't have to disparage you. I don't have to shame you. I can own my own part in it. And I can say, but I can also see why that happened, because maybe I wasn't as clear as I needed to be, or maybe, I can own my own part in that process and see how I maybe made that easy for you to do, because it does take two oftentimes. So, but we can channel our anger out of our body in the moment without attacking that person, without disparaging them, without saying something that shames them. We don't need to do that. We could stay present in the moment and show respect and still be angry and say, I'm frustrated, and
Mhm.
just put that anger into words without ever attacking them or creating some kind of like, I'm all right and you're all wrong scenario, which is not even possible.
But then again, Bronwyn, let me put a prediction to the scenario where if let's say you say, well, you didn't listen to my I would say not advice, but to my boundary, but then the other person can say, well, Bronwyn, you're trying to control me. You're trying to control this relationship by establishing certain boundaries that fits you, but that doesn't necessarily fits me. So then it comes back to like a tennis match where you're trying to control, he's trying to control, and then it never ends.
Well, if you're gullible, sure, but if you're listening to your anger, if you're connected with your anger and you learn to trust yourself, and you're like, Excuse me, you're saying that my boundaries are not okay with you? Wow. It sounds like you are just like trying to not listen to me, not hear me right now. You're refusing to take any responsibility, and you keep turning everything on me. And I give up. I mean, wisdom is knowing when to give up. If someone refuses to hear us, then we need to learn that whatever hope we have for that relationship is false, because you cannot love someone when you refuse to listen to them, because listening to someone is loving. Loving someone is listening. If someone continues to refuse to hear us and continues to gaslight and put things back onto us, there's no love. They might say they love us, but talk is cheap. There's no love, and we need to surrender false hope that that person will ever hear us.
But then isn't that a way for them to escape future conflict? Because if they say that if you mention, I will give up or I give up on that conversation,
Mhm.
then that's the only exit that they can have and repeat the same responses. So you never readdress the problem because for you said, what's the point?
Oh, no, no, no. I'm saying give up on that person, because if
Oh,
that
okay,
person
okay. I thought, okay.
refuses to listen, and we don't need that many experiences of a person to realize they're not a listener and they will never listen, especially when, God forbid, it's something that they might have done wrong, then we just learn to give up on that person, because that person is not a safe person.
But then if it's easier said than done here, Bronwyn, because if let's say you have a
Mhm.
family, kids with that person, it's not you cannot just get up any day and just say, I give up on that relationship or that marriage. So people will continue trying, but where is that breaking point where
Yeah,
you decide that nothing is going through this brain or nothing is going through his head or her head?
yeah,
And again, especially if they're narcissistic behavior and all. So
yeah.
where do you go and say, I will give up on that person, or there's still hope?
If they refuse to listen, I think whatever hope you have is completely false. Um, if they can start to listen, really listen, and listening doesn't just mean like, I heard you and this is what you said. Listening means like heeding what you're saying, like, okay, well, maybe that's hard for me to hear, but I hear that it really hurts you and you matter. So I'm going to hear it, even though it's hard for me to hear because I don't want you to feel hurt by me. So that's a priority. That person is now starting to prioritize us. They're starting to say, yeah, my feelings matter, but so do yours. And if they can do that, there's some hope. But if they're not able to do that, there's no hope. And yes, you're right. It's easier said than done to give up on a person and leave a relationship. But I will say my former career was in nutrition. And, my first master's degree is in nutrition. And I never thought I'd say this, but now I'm to the point as a therapist where I believe I see it so often that people get physically sick from the relationships that they refuse to leave. I see cancer. My best friend from childhood died of cancer about 10 years ago. I absolutely believe it was from her marriage. There's no doubt in my mind looking back that that was her own denial of how toxic her marriage was. And I believe that really allowed her to develop cancer as she did in her early 40s that took her. But I see it all the time. I see people get autoimmune disorders. I
Correct.
see people get chronic migraines that are debilitating. I see people, have paralyzing, crippling anxiety, insomnia, GI issues. Those are very common. These are all relational. And if we don't have, the ego strength to leave that relationship, it will kill us. I absolutely believe it will destroy us. And it's not, you know, doing any justice for our children that we're enabling this toxic relationship. We need to shield them from that. So, yeah, I see all that. And I think the long term ramifications are just too high to continue to ignore.
So, what would you attribute in terms of percentage, if you go back to your nutritional degree, um, of what people eat versus their mental illnesses or their toxic relationship that can contribute someone in getting physically sick?
I think they go hand in hand because I find that as my clients become healthier mentally, they naturally want to eat better. It just comes naturally. And I have a really good friend who I went to college with, undergrad, who is still in the world of nutrition. And she's like, "You're so smart to get out of the nutrition field, Bronwyn, because we can't help anyone eat better because the way you're going about it is right, where they have to get mentally healthy in order to
Mhm.
self nurture, because the way we eat is a form of nurture. And if we hate ourselves, we will never sustainably self nurture in a way that is good. If we learn to love ourselves, if we do that work, we're going to want to nurture ourselves. It just comes naturally.
I agree. And actually, I'm not sure if you actually saw the interview on 2020 a while back. They interviewed a woman who was 109 years old and she looked like she was 60. And they said, "So what is your secret?" She said, "I never got married to a man." So yes, I would agree that the toxicity that can occur in a relationship can cause someone to getting sick. So
Yeah.
is it really the solution to longevity? Is it really, I mean, can people, but then again, solitude or living alone can also contribute to depression
Yeah.
or anxieties.
Yes.
Where's the middle ground? Is it better to live a long life miserably or a short
Yeah.
life with someone that you could actually somewhat 80% of the time be happy with? So
Yeah.
again, there's never really a perfect answer.
Oh, I think there is, but I hear you that it's neither one of those two. I think again, going back to I talked about integrating with our inner child. When we integrate, and I on my podcast, I lead listeners through integration exercises that I do with my clients, and I want to get them out far and wide for everyone to do for themselves. Um, when we start to integrate with our inner child, we're really becoming whole and we start to trust ourselves. We dislodge all the shame because shame exiles us from ourself. It gets in the way. So we let go of the shame. We fully integrate. We attune to ourselves. We trust ourselves. We do right by ourselves. We protect ourselves. We advocate for ourselves. We listen to our feelings. We know they're valid. Um, we develop wisdom. We become more whole. We find what I find for me personally and for my clients is that anyone who's still in their life at this juncture is just kind of a bonus now. Like, it's great to have a great friend or a great partner, but they're not desperate for it like they used to be, because they feel themselves like they're not alone anymore. They're alone, but they're not lonely. They're not empty. They're not feeling like they need their better half anymore.
Mhm.
So I think that's really the solution. And when people start to integrate in a way, they do let go of a lot of relationships. Their eyes are kind of opened, like how toxic or how, kind of even not equal a lot of relationships are, where people are expecting them to do a lot more than that person is doing in return for them. And they start to let go of that, but they only have like maybe two or three really close people in their lives at the end, but they're like just so happy and they're flourishing and they're eating healthy, they're self-nurturing, and they're just better than they ever have been in their lives. I mean, I personally, I'm 54 right now. Um, I struggled with very severe insomnia
Mhm.
for about 30 years. And it wasn't until about 4 years ago for me when I really started to integrate, when I got rid of my shame and I became more whole. And that's when my eyes opened that I was betraying myself by staying in relationship with my father. And that's where I gave him an ultimatum. If you want a relationship with me, you're going to need to apologize and own the disrespect you have treated me with for my entire life and still are today. And I need you to become a safe person and do better. And if you refuse to do that, I guess we don't have a relationship. Well, he refused to do that. So we have not had a relationship for several years now. And the minute I came to that conclusion, I was able to discontinue all my medication. I started sleeping like a baby. I have not had sleep issues for years, for several years now. The minute my eyes opened to my father and I created that boundary with him.
That's amazing that you mentioned that. I mean, obviously, people who are, because I've been dealing with insomnia myself for other reasons, obviously. But do you think that now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this statistic, Bronwyn, but 81% of the women now initiate divorce with their significant other. And of course, there's a multitude of reasons as to why this happens. But do you think that people get to a point in a relationship where they're so saturated, so darn, I mean, enough to be able to continue on with this person?
Yeah.
Is it because the other person is dealing primarily with anger issue? And what have you seen in your practice now,
Mm,
where you actually are helping women or men dealing with
mm.
their other significant other that are angry all the time? I mean, do you tell them, hey, it's time to let go, or just still hope?
Well, I think the real problem that you're getting at isn't so much anger, although anger's there. I think it's shame. I believe men struggle with shame much more than women. I think it comes down to that little boys are shamed when they show their vulnerable feelings as
Mhm.
very young children, that when they cry, they're being told your true self, your real vulnerable self is shameful. And so we socialize that into them. Whereas little girls can cry, they can't show anger, ironically, but they can be vulnerable. And so women don't have that shame that comes up in vulnerability. And what I think happens when in a marriage or in a relationship between a man and a woman is a woman will say, "Hey, honey, I need to let you know when you say that, I feel this way." And that triggers the shame in the man. And see, shame distorts things. It's a liar. It is a absolute liar. It distorts what we hear. And so instead of that man saying, "Oh, okay. So when I say that, you feel hurt. Okay, that makes sense." Instead of them being able to hear, all they hear instead is, "You suck. You totally suck.
Mhm.
You suck so bad." And that's all they hear. And so they can't handle that. And so they deflect their shame back onto the woman. They say, "It's your fault. You're the one," right? And so that creates kind of that cycle that you were alluding to earlier. But that's shame. That is shame interfering and distorting everything.
A
And
reality.
so, I lead my listeners on my podcast in a shame exercise. When I talk about how men struggle more with shame than women, but it's another little exercise where we just are able to give that shame. And in the case of like a little boy, give it back to maybe back to his father in an exercise that we do in our imagination. Maybe the father called him a pussy when he was 4 years old and he cried. And so we can give that back to the father in our imagination, and we can let our 4-year-old self know, you know what, little Dan, you're not shameful.
Mhm.
Your dad was shameful. That belongs to him, not you. Right. So we can remove that for ourselves.
So before we conclude the podcast, where can you let our listeners know how to find you, Bronwyn?
Yeah. So my podcast is called Angry at the Right Things, and it's found wherever you subscribe to your podcast.
Do you have like a book related to anger or not yet?
I don't have a book. I'm always coming up with new stuff, so I just have an evolving podcast. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, Bronwyn, that is all the time that we have for today's podcast. And also, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. And thank you again for participating and inspiring our many listeners with your incredible knowledge with anger triggers. Now, we hope that you've all enjoyed today's episode. And I'm also very excited about the many upcoming guests that we have scheduled for season 26 of the Happiness Journey podcast, filled with inspirational stories just like the one that you listened today. Now, here are some concluding words of wisdom. Dealing with anger issues challenges can feel overwhelming, but it's important to remember that anger is a natural emotion. It's how we respond to it that matters. Recognizing your triggers is the first step towards gaining control. Techniques like deep breathing, mindfulness, and stepping away from heated situations can create space for calm and clarity. Now, seeking support from a therapist or joining anger management groups can provide tools to channel anger into productive actions. Building healthier communication skills and practicing patience takes time, but very small effort counts. Remember, managing anger isn't about suppressing it, it's about understanding it and responding in ways that lead to growth and connection. You have the power to transform your reaction and reclaim your peace. My name is Dr. Dan Amzallag, and you may all keep pursuing your amazing journey in life.